And we'll get started now. I think it's right on time, I think. It's 3 o'clock. Yep. Then, I don't know whether you know anything about Starship. It's one of those projects of SpaceX. Now, SpaceX is, of course, the Elon Musk company, which also owns Tesla. And we've talked about their sort of projects before. And what I have actually to show you today is about SpaceX, because SpaceX is one of those projects that again is looking at the future, not a distant future, but a fairly achievable future. Now, why do I say that? Because the projects that Elon Musk has undertaken are quite sort of difficult, but nevertheless, something that needed to be done. Therefore, what I would say is, let me mute this because I hear some sounds coming through. Mute all, yeah. Okay, I've muted everybody. So back to what I was saying, essentially go back to this thing, just an introduction, that his projects are to do with the future and the betterment of society and of the world. And that's why I'm a keen follower of his projects. And we've talked in the past, Tesla cars and the sustainable energy, which is crucial for the future of mankind. And we are nearly there in trying to be able to try and bring it about into general use. Sustainable energy, well, by that I mean energy which is non-pollutable, like the fossil fuels, and the energy which comes from the sun and then stored in the battery. And that battery power is the one that provides the motive power for cars. That's Tesla. And it's not just the cars, then we are going to be also having household heating and hot water, air conditioning, all that being provided by power from the battery. And the battery will be connected to the grid in order to try and work out the fluctuations and so on. But on the whole, there'll be big farms of solar panels and alternative energies, be it wind power, be it solar, be it water, whichever. And the crucial question about all these energies is that we need to be able to have what I call renewable possibilities. And not renewable, but storage possibilities. We have the capability to generate this power, but to be able to store is a rather difficult problem. And that's where Tesla comes in, and their company, which is working on batteries, is the one that's going to be delivering that storage capacity, not only for the cars, but for all energy uses in the future. Now, one of the projects, of course, is also the one to do with the interlink, the interconnectivity of internet, and that's the space internet, which means that you'll have the Starlink project. This is another one of his projects. I've talked about that before. It's going to be dependent on a lot of satellites in orbit on Earth and being able to connect anybody anywhere in the world. Because at the moment, half the world is not connected, and therefore you can see there's a bigger disadvantage there. So he wants to do that, and already we're having that project under beta testing, as they call it, which means that about 800 sort of satellites are whizzing around, and they're able to communicate to sort of users down in North America. So that's already starting to sort of, make some headway. And we've seen the Tesla cars are making headway. And this is another project is, of course, the reusable rockets. And here today, I'm going to be talking about the type of things that these starships can do. And of course, they're also well on their way. And we'll see how, as we progress with the detail that I have for you as we go along. So let's ask the basic questions. What is a Starship? Well, essentially, it's a ship that it's a rocket, if you like, that can go long distances and carry big payloads. And we're not talking about kilograms, we're talking about tons. So it's a very powerful type of rocket, and it's reusable, which makes it like our plane, if you like. You know, we have these jets flying around all over the world. They're reusable, but they use fossil fuels. But this Starship is not going to use fossil fuel. It's going to be using, of course, a different type of thing. They're called oxygen and methane. These are the two types of fuels it has, but they're very efficient and they're not going to be polluting the planet too much. So the Starship, so that's what it is, and we'll see. Why are we having one? You know, first of all, we're having one because of the reusability property that they have. Not property, it's the make, the design, enables us to reuse it time and again, and therefore bring the cost down enormously. And that's why we've got that savings here. I'll go into that a bit more detail as I go further down. There are uses of Starships on Earth, because it's not just a question of using a Starship to go to Mars or to the moon, but we can use them on Earth as well, and I'll tell you how. And then, of course, the moon usage is very much very close now to having a base on the moon, and we'll have that, and sooner or later we're going to have bases, that colonies in Mars. So let's get on with it. Hello, haven't I muted you? So here we are. This is a Starship. It's not a good picture, but I'll show you better pictures as we go along. And what he's doing is he's investing his money into building these. And one of the ways that he says he wants to fund the program is through the Starlink project. And Starlink is the one to provide the space internet connectivity, or orbital type of system of connectivity, so it's accessible to the whole world. Now that has revenue generating and potential, and that's going to be funding the space program. That's one of his objectives. So you can see how he thinks. He's not necessarily asking the government to fund it and this, that, or the other, but actually finding ways and means to take his projects forward. Now you can liken this Starship to the old idea of a Union Pacific Railroad. Now why have I put this up? Because you remember the Union Pacific was the one that connected the east coast of America to the west coast. So much so that it opened up the trade and created more settlements. So that is basically the idea that we are also sort of looking at in having Starships, so that they can go far distances and open up new settlements and provide, commerce and so on if necessary as we go along. Because it won't just stop at Mars, it's going to go beyond as well. So we'll see the impact of what this had on USA as a whole, and we know how much of a difference it made, and we can expect the similar type of difference to emerge once we start using these Starships. Now here's the Starship. It's a railroad to the space, as I've said, like the train services that we had, and we can build up these colonies. Now these colonies, that was the stuff of science fiction, if you remember, but now no longer. It's now within the realm of possibilities, and not too far in the distant future either. So we're going to have this railroad, as it were, for us to bring about that this colonization of moon and the planets. And they will be creating the bases on the moon as well, and Mars. So here we are. Now, another use, you see, because this Starship is such a humongous thing, it has the capacity to carry 400 of these Starlink satellites. You remember we talked about the Falcon 9, which is another one of those types of rockets that SpaceX has, which has been putting these satellites up in orbit. And that's how a lot of these Starlink satellites were put up. And at each launch, they were putting in something like 60 satellites at a time. And of course, these Falcon 9 rockets have also been used to take provisions to the International Space Station, and in fact, two crew were also sent off, if you remember, last month to the International Space Station from USA, and that was by SpaceX. And that's the first time USA has been able to do that, because prior to that, it was the Russians who used to do it, because the USA had stopped their program, the Saturn and the Moon program, and it was not doing anything substantial for a good 30, 40 years. And because of that, they didn't have the technology to put the people, or take the people to the International Space Station. And Russians were doing that at a cost, of course. And it was quite a huge cost. But since Elon Musk has come about with his Falcon rockets, reusable, and because they're reusable, they're cheaper, he's been able to also put some astronauts in the ISS, the International Space Station, and also brought them back. So you can see a private enterprise doing this is a fantastic type of achievement, because private enterprises don't have the resources of the government. And I'll show you later on as we progress, the first time that NASA had to put to the moon, the rocket, it cost them a humongous amount of money in those days. And today's term is over $1 billion. So it was a lot of money being spent by NASA in those days. So coming back to this Starlink satellites being put 400 at a time, and he plans to put, I think, a few hundred, 100 launches per year. That's two launches per week. So you're going to have a number of satellites building up pretty rapidly, because he wants altogether about 42,000 of them to be able to cover the whole planet and give accessibility and high-speed link, in fact, to everybody, regardless of where they are, with just the help of a dish. You just put the dish in your garden, point it to the sky, and you'll have the signal. None of this thing about having to dig cables and upset people by, digging up roads and all that sort of thing, and not to mention the cost. The cost also is enormous to be able to provide all that type of connectivity to everybody. So here we can see, and this is going to be able to fund the development of Starships. See, already beta testing has started, which means that people are starting to use little by little, as internet access, especially those people who don't have connectivity in the countryside and so on in North America. They're already starting to link a little bit, and the test phase is on at the moment. So they are going to be helping to, the International Space Station is the one that's already there, and it needs to be supplied with people, with goods, and all sorts of provisions, test equipment. So it's doing that, and you need to go backwards and forwards. And that's the job of the Starship as well now, to do in a much bigger way, because the Falcons are a bit smaller and they can't carry as much load. So now the Starship is also so big that itself can be like a space station. And if you join up 2 or 3 of these Starships, it can be like a station which can be whizzing around, carrying out all the experiments and so on, and having, all the facilities to operate as a station. So you can see alternative space stations will be coming in the not too distant future. Now, going back and looking to see why is this possible to do now with Elon Musk, and we said that because he's going to be using reusable rockets, and reusable rocket means all this structure of the rocket can be reused. It's only the fuel cost. But in the old days, what happened was that NASA invests $450 million per launch for the shuttle. Here's the shuttle sitting there. And there's the rocket taking it up. And each of these launch costs so much. And of course, that was a humongously big sort of expenditure. And now what we have is, with SpaceX Falcon 9 rockets, they can, their cost launches are about $50 to $60 million. Now, that is because they're smaller rockets. And therefore, although they're reusable, the cost is still around this much for the moment. But as we progress to a Starship, Starship launches can be reduced down to 2 million. So you can see the enormous benefit that one is going to be having with these Starships starting to be like a railroad up to the orbit and further down to the moon, and then beyond that to Mars. So a tremendous amount of improvement in technology and reusable technology at that. So here we are, reusable. Now I'm showing these pictures, which seem to be rather odd, because these are not the final products. These are test, if you like, ships, which are meant to only sort of test certain aspects of their capability. Now, they have started to sort of already do these tests, and that's why you're having these already on these launch pads. So anyway, he's going to be building 100 of them a year, so in his factory. So these, once they're tested out, they're going to be in production to that extent. Now, if you look at the makeup of the Starship, it has a base, which is the launcher. And then it sits on that launcher over there on top, the Starship. So you've got the launcher, which basically is fuel tank, if you like, which takes the ship up and then disconnects, and then because it is empty of fuel, drops down and comes back to its base and sits down there. It doesn't get destroyed. And then this Starship continues onwards. So here's that Starship. And the second stage, is there. It's reusable as well. And of course, the Starship is reusable as well. Okay, this is the launcher coming back. You see, once it's launched the Starship, that the idea is that it'll come back and sit on the base and be reused again. And the cost of that would simply be the cost of the fuel to be reused again. That's how it's going to be taking. So the heavy lifting, because the Starship can carry quite a big load, and therefore it needs a lot of power to boost it. And that launcher is the one that gives it that boost, and then of course drops down. And then it comes back to the base, and then it sort of, has refueling and so on for next sort of flights. But it also has, other Starships that can be put on the top and be put into, orbit as well, or send it to wherever they want. Here it is. It's returns and refueled, and that's the refueling tanks. The other thing you can do with the launcher is, you see, one is the Starship that you can launch, but then you can launch what they call these fuel tanks. And these fuel tanks can be parked in orbit, which means that the Starship can connect to it and sort of carry on even further. So these tanks can be taken up any number of times by the launcher. Here are these joint tanks here orbiting the Earth. See? And it can refuel the spaceship. Now, the amount of payload it carries, we're talking about 100 tons plus to Mars. So just imagine, at the moment, the first colony will have with 100 tons, but then he's talking about 100 sort of, starships. So you can see the amount of tonnage that can be taken over to Mars and to build these space settlements. So this is not science fiction. It's all within the realm of our, not too distant future now. Now, just to recap on this thing about the Saturn rocket, Saturn V rocket, you remember, that put the men on the moon the first time. That was in the 70s, you might remember, some of you. Now, it carried about 50 metric tons, and it was a humongous sort of rocket. I've seen it when I was in Houston. I went to their rocket launching site, and the old Saturn rockets were, being displayed there. I mean, they're so big that two people standing on each other's shoulders can still sort of be easily accommodated in the diameter there. Now, this is another configuration of the Starship's thing, the new engines. They can carry up to 150 tons. And they're going to be going to the moon. And that's already, tests are being, I think in the next few months, we will have a rocket going to the moon by NASA. It's called Artemis. So the future ships are going to be carrying 100 plus type of payloads. So on one hand, you've got a larger capacity, which is very good. On the other hand, because it is so cheap, it's just a cost of fuel that you have to pay for. So you've got a double sort of gain here. It's, first of all, very low cost to launch. And secondly, it takes a huge amount of load. So you can see the benefits of that. Now, Elon Musk just jokingly has said, they can carry, 1,000 people on Earth. Supposing you want to go from UK to Australia, that's about, 18-hour flight or whatever. If you have a rocket there sitting on the Thames, on a platform there, you can have people go in, and within 1 hour you'll be in Australia. But of course, it won't carry 1,000 people. It says if it has no toilets, it can put up 1,000 people. But that's just a joke over there. So, but what we are going to be seeing soon now, within the short, maybe by next year, you'll have about 100 people taken to moon. The Starship will be able to do that in the next couple of hours. It says in the next 3 hours, 3 years, but we'll have tests carrying fewer people. Yeah, that's sending people to the International Space Station. So being so large, the Starship could end up by being its own space station. That's what I said earlier on. If you have 2 or 3 of them, you can link them up and it can be a space station on its own. And if you look at our current space station, it's very modular. It's connected to each other like little pods. And they keep on increasing those pods because you don't have the payload rockets to take heavy loads. But with Starship, itself has that capacity and can be an international space station itself. And it can also house these humongous big telescopes. These telescopes are necessary to be sent out to space to try and capture the space sort of activity. And we have these huge collapsible type of telescopes that can be taken up and put into not just orbit, but also on their flights, like the one that is going on at the moment. There's so many which are sending back all sorts of signals. But this is going to be big enough to be able to capture the even furthest sort of signals and light coming from the edge of the universe. Also, these types of structures that are going to be built in are these inflatable things. Because to date, we have had only small little things that can be taken up and built, but now you can have these large structures to be built and attached to the space stations. Now, we can also have these starships for flights on Earth. As I said, from London to Sydney, we can make it in 1 hour or possibly less. So passengers from one city to another able to go anywhere for that matter. So you have this tremendous amount of advantage to the 18-hour flights that we have to at the moment. Here it is showing us that these rockets will land on the edge of the city. Vertically, they just land and then they take off vertically. You don't need these big runways as we do for our jets at the moment. So we can have these things, they say, as early as 2024, which is the next 2 to 3 years. So amazing type of immediate, in our own lifetime, I think we'll be able to see this happening. And it's quite an exciting proposition. Okay, now, the moment we start to sort of have these rockets and space starships going, you're going to start sending them to build colonies. And colonies means you have to take payloads and then assemble these modules over there so that you have like a small little villagey habitation. Now, one of the reasons why we wanted to be able to do that is, as Elon Musk says, Earth has been the home, of course, of human beings, but it can't stay forever because there is a possibility that sooner or later we may find a disaster, in which case we don't want to risk humankind being lost totally. So like the dinosaurs disappeared, we don't want the humankind to disappear. So we need to be able to keep the human species alive, if not on Earth, elsewhere. And not just Mars, but even beyond. So let's see how that sort of works out in the future. It's all the stuff of science fiction coming to science facts. So you can see the cities growing there in Mars. This will allow up to 1 million tons to be transported, 1,000 sort of flights of each carrying 10,000 flights each. Is it 1,000 times 1,000? Yeah, that's 1 million. 1,000 flights. So do the 100,000. Yeah, well, anyway, 1 million tons. Colony, 1 million tons. That's going to be over 20 years. So we're not going to do it all at one go, of course, because one of the things is that it's far away and it takes time. And I'll just show you some of the think about ferrying a service between this. See, the alignment between Mars and Earth comes about every 2 years. That's when it's optimal to distance. Otherwise, it's humongously big distance if it goes on the opposite side. So if it is close enough in the orbit to Earth, then you can go by rocket and get there a little bit faster. So that alignment takes every 2 years. And therefore, every 2 years, we're going to send lots and lots of these starships towards colonizing Mars. The flights is going to be there by 2024. It says over here in 2022, we can have a passenger mission and a passenger mission in 2024. So we'll have this 2022 just inanimate type of rocket going over to Mars. That's in 2 years' time. And in a further 2 years, we can have a passenger mission to Mars. So you can see it's a pretty close time frame. Okay, Mars is there. Sorry about the moon. It's supposed to be moon there. Just typed it wrong. So there's a bit, NASA is developing a technology and a rocket to be able to go to the moon. The project is called Artemis, and they want to have a moon base. And SpaceX is one of the companies who's been asked to sort of supply the rockets to be able to manage that whole project. Okay, this is just reminding us about the Starlink, using the revenues from Starlink to fund the Starship program. Okay, but NASA is a big supporter of. Now, NASA has helped SpaceX as well because they have given them contracts. And the thing that is important about NASA is that every government that comes in, they don't continue with the same type of funding. Each government comes in and they either build up the funding or draw down the or push it down. So that's one of the reasons why NASA has said we would like the private enterprises to come in because our budgets are going up and down like a yo-yo times. And a private enterprise can sort of work without that political uncertainty. Therefore, they have bought in SpaceX just for that. Not just SpaceX, but there's Boeing as well, and Bezos or Amazon's company called Blue. I think those sort of companies are also in the act, but they're not as advanced as SpaceX. So moon launch by 2023. There we go. This is our Earth. You can see it's blue, which are water. Now, one of these launches that are going to be taking the 100 people to the moon are all these types of people here. We've got them, the artists, sculptors, architects, and all of them are going to be put on that flight to the moon so that they can go to the base and have that experience of out of this world experience, let me put it that way, and come back and do some sort of original work. So their experience to create new works here on Earth. So that's, that should make the artists of the world very happy because they will have an insight as to what this is all about. Now the size of this, I told you, is about 18 meters girth, which means that the diameter is 18 meters, which means that it's quite big. You can imagine 18 meters is about 60 feet. And that's the size of 2 rooms, 30-foot long rooms, sort of. So you can imagine it's quite big. And with that sort of dimensions, you can carry a lot of. Okay, these are test flights which are already underway. This little fellow, that is just the first test that they did a few months ago. I think last year they did that, where his job was to basically go up and then come down and not to sort of fly around. It was just the reusability aspect of it, that it can go up and it can come down without having to crash it. So that was last year. Now we've got now further tests which are taking place. This is for takeoff and landing. I think one recently was done, which is a bigger one. There we are, and it goes up there, a few hundred meters and comes down again. And now there was one scheduled last week actually to go up 20 kilometers, but because of the weather, they had to postpone it. And that's going to be 20 kilometers up and then back down again. So you can see that progressively increasing the stages and testing out all their equipment, which I think is a very smart thing to do. Now, one of the principles that Elon Musk has used is rather, a good idea. If a design takes too long to build, then if you have to change the design, that sounds like common sense, but sometimes that escapes because we keep working at a design, for endless sort of thing there in order to overcome problems. But Elon Musk, because he's had a training in physics, so he goes down to very basic sort of particles, as it were, basic sort of notions. And also he's got, engineering sort of qualifications. So from the notional physics ideas, he can see the implementation can be done by engineering. So if the design is taking too long, then he says we've got to change the design. And one thing that I remember recently that happened was that the rockets were using carbon fiber for its bodies, and it was taking too long to try and overcome all the problems. So he switched it to having the outside of the rocket made of steel. And with steel, he has had a lot of benefits, and he's making a lot of progress. So you can see if the design is taking too long, then the design is wrong. So you need to change it. Good sort of principle. Towards becoming extraterrestrial. Okay, that's all I'm going to say today for the moment, and we can stop the share now. Go back to our Q&A. All right, and I'll unmute you. Here we are. Okay, Ross, you're still on mute, and Brenda, so you can unmute yourselves. Okay, anybody have any questions? We've got quite a few people at the moment. We've got about 16 people, 15 at the moment. That's a good number. I'm sure you're full of questions.
You're becoming more and more popular.
Yes, Pam.
The Artemis project, who's funding that?
NASA.
NASA's funding it.
That's right. It's NASA's project, and they want to make that into a moon base. And of course, a lot of money is probably coming from defense-oriented type of activity. But they have seconded these other companies, 3 of them. One of them is SpaceX. The idea is that you set up a moon base and you have a station going around the moon. And the station will have the activity from the base to the station. And there needs to be rockets flying in between these two. And then, of course, the main rocket to be able to go from Earth to the moon. So that's the type of project that they're working on.
Thank you.
Yes, June.
I don't actually believe that necessarily if it takes too long to accomplish a design, it has to be abandoned. Surely some designs can be achieved over a gradual and quite a long period. What is actually the rationalization? What is the reason to believe that you have to abandon the design if it's taking too long?
I think the main idea behind this is that if there are alternatives that are there, you need to sort of consider them in the light of the design taking longer than what was expected, and therefore try out the alternatives. And if the alternatives are able to sort of give you the desired result, then you go with the alternative. You see, the idea of just following one design seems to me to be like a dead end, as it were, because if you have a choice, then you must explore the choices as well. Yes. Well, we're all sort of happy with the
Starstruck.
Yes, we're speechless.
Starstruck.
Our sort of narrative about the future, I think we should all be very happy about, because you know, when you look around the COVID and all the economy and all that type of thing, it's very depressing. But this sort of a narrative, I think we can all look forward and say, well, something is happening which is beyond, the normal control, and we can help. Okay, Ruth, go ahead.
Oh, I didn't know if you could see me. I was wondering what the Artemis project is wanting to accomplish, and also how many countries contribute to NASA. What are all the countries that are contributing?
Well, to NASA, nobody contributes because NASA is funded by the US government. But if you have the International Space Station, there you have a lot of collaboration with the different countries, except China. China was not allowed to come in. So they're going to put up their own space station. But as far as the moon base is concerned, it seems to be a lot more of a, I would call it strategic value, because it is being funded by USA alone. I'm not sure if other countries are participating in that particular program of the base, because I know the Chinese aren't doing it. I know that Indians are not doing it. So in terms of getting an advantage of having a base, I think it's like saying if you have a base in a country, not all countries are going to be participating except the country of interest to the country that builds the base. So it has the strategic type of considerations, I think.
Thank you.
Yeah. So yes, go ahead, Giselle.
I was just wondering how much does America, NASA, get from other countries? How much exchange of information between the countries? I know we're not exactly brilliant friends with China, but it seems crazy that a number of different countries are doing the same thing with going into space. And I just wondered how much did they exchange information and help each other?
Well, if you take the case of Russia, because Russia and USA were the only countries that had put Sputnik up, you remember,
That's
and
right.
they had their goals of going to moon and so on. They don't share technology. Although they shared the space station in terms of doing experiments once you're in the space station, but in terms of sharing the knowledge about their rockets so that NASA could build similar rockets, that hasn't happened. So they keep their technology to themselves. So that's one of the reasons why NASA brought in the private enterprise, because that was a very smart thing to do. Because if it was just dependent on NASA for the space program, then NASA would be held back. And that's what happened. You see, when Kennedy asked NASA to put the man on the moon, and after that, the funding got cut off, and nobody went to the moon after that. So 30 years, it was without any funds for that type of effort. What it did was it did some unmanned type of launches to send, these sort of equipment to various planets and to do all sorts of research. But in terms of the current program, it's going to be much more under control of the US military, I'm sure, but of course the US government. But even India has got their own space program. They sent off a rocket, and even Israel has one. I think their sort of lander crashed into the moon. India has sent it, and it also crashed, I think, but they found that there is water under the surface of the moon. And China launched a lander on the other side of the moon, which is the dark side, which we don't see. So a lot of countries are at it, but they don't share technology.
Very sad, I think.
Yeah? Who said something?
Yeah, no, I just said it's very sad they don't share information.
No, you see, the thing about this is it's a very commercially oriented type of effort, because there's going to be a big advantage to any country that can go to the moon and start mining or whatever they do. So there is some benefit to that country. But basic research, I agree with you, should be shared. And that is the sort of thing, that is why we have this multilateral type of organizations becoming members of whatever organization it is, and they talk amongst themselves, they share. But when it comes to commercial organizations, they don't cooperate too much. Apple won't cooperate too much with some company in China, for that matter, or that company in India, because we are based on a commercial type of attitude there. So there we are. Yes, Ruth.
Does SpaceX only operate in the US? Do they have any other?
Well, SpaceX, along with Tesla, along with these other sort of companies they have, they are open to getting business from other countries. SpaceX has said they will launch satellites for other countries at a fractional of the cost that was possible before. So SpaceX is in the business of making money out of their launchers, but that's not enough. It's not big enough business. That's why they have started to develop the Starlink. Now, Starlink is something that every person in the world can be using as an internet connection. And people pay $100 a month or whatever for their connectivity. So you can imagine the amount of revenue that they can generate once that Starlink sort of network is in place. And that will fund their programs that they have.
So Starlink basically like the internet?
Starlink, yeah. Starlink is made up of a lot of satellites, in orbit, something of the order of about 42,000 of them, which will talk to each other and then talk to people on the Earth, as it were, and at high speed. So that is already starting to go into what they call a beta testing phase, because they've already got about 800 of those satellites being used. And there was a thing that I saw, message saying, if you want to participate in having Starlink, please contact us. So I did contact them, but I couldn't put my address down. So I had to put my address down as London.
Wow. I just hope we get it in this country. I hope we don't block it.
Yeah, especially in the countryside where there is not much connectivity, and the people in these far-off places, not near the cities, they are the ones who are going to benefit the most initially. Yeah.
Shafika, I was just going to ask where Britain is in this. Was it doing something with Europe, and they're not doing it now, or what, or anything at all?
Yeah, well, they bought a company which was going bankrupt, and I don't know why they bought it, because there's not much information on it, but they paid 500 million or something of that sort, quite an enormous amount of money. Or was it the valuation of the company? I'm not sure how much they paid for it. But it seems to be a type of trying to get into the space business and into the internet business in some way, but I haven't seen much information. Although I must admit I haven't really looked for that. Although they're buying a bankrupt company, seems to me to be some sort of they must have seen some value in it. Maybe they're paying for the technology. It's called, I think, OneWeb or something like that. Yeah, George, are you with us? No, George is not with us. Yeah. Okay. Who else is here? All right. Hello, Ross. Your mic is off because you've been talking to your friend next door.
No, I made her come and watch with me because I told her how interesting your program was. So she's watched with me. She's a U3A member, so I think I've turned her on to, for future. I thought it was fascinating.
Yeah, I don't think you need to be a member of the U3A to sort of zoom in or join. You
I
just
don't
have
know.
to click.
I didn't know that. But anyway,
Yeah.
I think it's fascinating and I'm really interesting today. Thank you, Shafi.
Yeah, welcome, welcome.
What are you going to talk about next week, Shafiq?
I haven't decided yet. I decided on the Starship only over the weekend.
Now tell me, with all of this Starship stuff, did Star Trek come first or did Elon Musk have his ideas first?
Well, I think one of the things that is my theme, as it were, is to look at the big projects which are achievable, which are underway, and which you don't get reported too much. And we need to have a good story anyway, because our title is Stories Behind the Headline.
Yeah, but so, you know, Hollywood's been making all these things, Star Trek and Starship. And where is that in relation to what's actually going on?
Well, at the moment, if you look at Star Trek had that big Enterprise, remember, that huge ship that, that started off by saying, we go where no one has gone before. That type of a logo, I think, slogan. And I used to watch that in the 70s very, very closely. You know, Captain Kirk and Spock, you remember?
Yeah. I know.
It was the stuff of everyone. Yeah, that's right. But what it did open up, I think, is the mind for a lot of people to look at it from the point of view of what humans can do if they put their mind to it. And it is achievable, but maybe not immediately, but sooner or later. So long, of course, as if we have good leadership. And that's why, in fact, I would say that our projects like SpaceX and Starlink and Tesla have gone surging ahead just in the last few years, because you have private fund coming from Elon Musk himself, who is a physicist and an engineer by training, and therefore knows what he can do in order to achieve the betterment of society and the world. It's not like a political decision that is usually made to fund NASA because you happen to be a Republican and happens to sort of be good for the jobs for the factories in your state. So it becomes a very complicated type of decision making that withholds, you know, a lot of the. I think there is some noise coming from somewhere.
It's cooking, I think.
Somebody's making their
cooking.
supper.
Can we mute that person?
I don't know where it's coming from.
Or whoever's making their supper, can they move?
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Whoever
What's
is
the
making
matter with people?
Okay, so what I would say that NASA, I think, is an example of that, but they did the right thing by bringing in private money, and private money is making a difference, so long as those people are committed to bettering the world, not necessarily consuming more and making more money. Like if you take the example of Amazon, they're dedicated to more consumption and making more money. If you look at even Apple, they're consumed by having to have more people using their devices. They're not bettering the world. In a way, I suppose they are doing, because they're making life easier. So as far as doing these big projects, you know, it really required some visionary. And we have, luckily, in terms of this South African guy, Elon Musk, whom I've talked before, as having, you know, the right type of ideas. Yeah, Ruth.
I'm just wondering if he won't be corrupted. You know what I mean? And it's a real delicate balance. If somebody has a wonderful idea, and look at the atomic bomb and what happened with the atom bomb.
Yeah, but Ruth, if you look at the atomic bomb, it was a government effort. It's not an individual. And in the case of Elon Musk, he's an individual who's calling the shots in terms of some very big projects, which he's already starting to deliver on. So that is a very big difference between the, if he gets lost on the way, it could, of course, we can't discount anything, but so far, apart from his little quirky type of actions, like naming his son in numerals and in some sort of funny alphabets, which luckily the registrar of birth and death said, no, you can't have just numbers for your son. You need to have a name. So he changed I think the 12 to XII, I think.
So what's his son XII?
No, there is a couple of other sort of symbols as well. So anyway, that's his rather little quirky type of side of him. But on the main thing, I think he's pretty sound, I think.
Shafiq.
Yeah, George.
Very interesting. Well, what do you think about UFOs?
UFOs?
Yeah.
Well, UFO is something that has been there around for a while, but we haven't had any evidence. But I wouldn't discount that totally, although I have my doubts that any alien civilization will not sort of somehow make itself known in some, real way. But the fact that these sightings that we have had have not been confirmed, and therefore, that argument about them having visited Earth and all that, it sounds, a little bit difficult to accept totally. Although I must say that if you look at the basic question of where life came from, onto Earth, there's this thing about the soup and the water and how the thing came about. But the other thing is that some asteroid could have come and hit Earth, which had already some life forms on it. So, that doesn't mean that the whole universe is empty. It means that there is, I think, first of all, I think some life forms. But more importantly, I believe that there is consciousness on Earth. Because you remember when I talked about some of the things about, what was it, on AI, we looked at the possibility of what is the difference between a completely AGI or other artificial general intelligence, which is very close to a human being, as opposed to a human being. What is the difference? Will they be able to take over? And the difference is basically one of, I said at that time, consciousness. The AGI human being at the moment is not self-conscious or self-aware. And we are self-conscious, we are self-aware. So that basic difference is there. And it could be that in the future, we do know what is self-consciousness. At the moment, people are experimenting and finding we don't know what is self-consciousness. Just we know that we are aware, but we don't know how and why. So there's a big research going on that. So in future, we might know whether we can have artificial human beings just like us. Okay, Giselle.
Shafiq, it's just that there was a talk not long ago on Radio 4 about AI. They simulated a discussion between, I can't remember who it was, this man and a robot. And they were saying, do you experience emotions? How much awareness do you have? And the robot, who had a name, answered and said, yes, we do feel emotions, but just in a different way from what you do. That was just what they were saying.
What about the awareness part? I suppose he probably, once you switch it on, he probably knows he is who he is. But the much more fundamental thing about, what we are, I think is quite sort of complex. I'm not sure whether that AI robot knows what it is, because at the moment we ourselves don't know what is the self-awareness. That's what these scientists were saying when I was reading up on this AI.
I think we do.
Yeah, we do.
And I mean, each person can have their own concept of what self-awareness is. And if you look, for example, if you study how autistic people feel aware and how they view the world, or people with different psychological problems, or they just see things differently from the way that other human beings look at it.
Yeah,
they feel aware in a different way.
Yeah, I'm not saying that we don't. I'm not saying that we don't feel awareness. What I'm saying is that we don't know what it is, where it comes from. You see, that's the problem. If you just put a lot of memory together, I'm talking artificially now. If you just put memory together in a computer, will it become self-aware? You know, we have to build some logic into it to be able to sort of follow through the steps, and to follow only those steps that we program it for. So this AI is something that is different from that robot. A robot just follows the instruction. AI will give us the learning capability so that we can learn as we go along. But this thing about being aware is the thing that is, you know, very, people are not able to put their finger on it. So
I don't know. I remember studying awareness, and they do have definitions, and especially if you studying Freud and Jung, they did have an idea, their view of what awareness was and what consciousness was. And I'm sorry, I can't think right now. It was so many years ago that I did psychology. I can't actually remember exactly what they were saying, but they do have their definition.
Yeah, if I may put it this way, if you just put a lot of these memory chips together and link them up, will they then become self-aware is the question. You see?
It's not just memories. It's what you observe and how you feel about it.
Yeah, see, what I'm reducing the memory down to is all the summation of all senses and our thinking, which is the interconnectivity. But will that all of a sudden make itself say, oh, I'm a little chip? Will it wake up and say that? Well, anyway,
I wish I could remember more of my psychology. I just can't remember it all now. It's too many years ago.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people are looking into this, especially the neurologists and those people who are working on the brain are trying to figure out how is it that humans have that capacity? Where does it come from? What makes it happen? Because if we know how it comes about, then we can put it into an AI robot and he will become aware as well, like a human being. And then there's no end to what the enhanced AI can do, because he can be, you know, super powerful.
I think that it's probably from all the different, from our senses, from hearing and seeing and touch and all our senses, and putting that together, and the emotions and memories that we form, and that it would gradually grow, I would imagine. But I don't know, did anyone here see that fantastic exhibition at the Barbican on AI? It was just a few years ago, because that was fantastic. And they had on these television screens where you could speak to the robots and you could be saying, what do you feel about this? What emotions do you feel? They had very good answers, and you'd imagine you're speaking to a person.
Yeah, you see, all those people that we see who respond to certain questions, they're just responding. The highest capability that these people will have is, of course, learning by themselves. And that's what was shown, that in the case of this Go program, you know, the Go, which has to do with acquiring territory, it's a board game. It's a Go. It's a board game which has, you know, infinite number of possibilities. It's much more complicated in terms of how to play that, you know, having a winning strategy, let me put it that way, than chess, for instance. And they couldn't sort of, you know, write a program for a machine to do that. like in the case of the chess, they wrote a program so that the computer beat the grandmaster of chess. In the case of Go, they couldn't. So what they did was they made the AI learn the Go program, how to play it. And because it had this immense sort of access to all the knowledge of Go and previous games, it learned it in 4 hours and beat the grandmaster of Go. See? But if you ask him the question, do you know who you are or something like that, you know, that he's a chip or what? You see, I can say I'm me, but the very fact that I'm me is because all my neurons in the brain and whatnot have created something called awareness. And that's what is missing in the robots. And sooner or later, I'm sure we will find out.
Maybe because the robots haven't lived as long as you have or me, you know, because we're basing all of our awareness on the last 60 years, however long, you know. But you know, the robot hasn't been around for that long that it can collect all of these memories and emotions. We've got a lot to base it on. So I suppose for us, if we're speaking to a robot, it's like talking to a 3-year-old child, 4-year-old child. How much awareness do they have?
George wants to say something.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
I should shut up, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think it's what we define as a robot. I mean, who's to say that we're not robots? You know, that we have been created by some other artificial intelligence, you know, some time ago, and now we are developing artificial intelligence ourselves in like a chain of events. And, and the other thing I wanted to say about UFOs was, I mean, if we're investigating for the first time, apparently, you know, like Mars and Jupiter, who's to say that we're not seen as UFOs to beings who live there in another form of consciousness? You know, because the brain that we have, or the mind, or the eyes, is only for this earth. You see, so we only see things that we see here, and so when we look at other things, you know, we are not looking at the consciousness of maybe what those beings have. You know, it's already pre-programmed that when I look at the moon, I see a white thing up in the sky, but it could be completely different.
Yeah, see, that area of what's beyond the humanity or human being, it goes into the realm of multi-dimensions and the spiritual world and the unseen. It's very difficult to be able to sort of come to terms with that completely because we don't know what that is. The only thing that we have at the moment with us is some sort of experimental approach and a theoretical approach to be able to try and look at the world. And we'll have to wait to see how far we can get, how far we can go with that. Because even our brain at the moment is limited, but if we extend it by hooking onto an AI, a computer, which does you know, 1 million times faster and has more data, then the capacity to be able to understand ourselves may be increased enormously. Therefore, there are those possibilities that in the future, we may gain the insight into all these things, but at the present, we don't have that, you know? Yep. But I'm happy to be to be an earthling for the moment. I don't know what the future worlds are going to be like, but hopefully they are going to be.
I think the telescope part of it is interesting. You know, we'll see beyond things that we've not seen before.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
But you know, it's so much work that has gone in already into how much data they have collected. They're still shifting through it. Yeah. Okay.
Did you watch that Michael Palin program when he went to the Antarctica, one of the poles, And this woman, she was interviewed, said, so few people have actually been to the poles, you know, both the North and the South Pole. You know, just a very limited amount of people have been there. That must be quite an experience, mustn't it?
Yes, probably seeing it like some of these jungles, people haven't seen foreigners, and they come and touch you to see if you're real.
It's quite an experience.
At least that's what the photo evidence has shown us. But they seem to be not warlike people. They seem to be quite friendly people.
Yeah.
You know,
maybe it's quite like in space. Maybe the people are friendly. You know?
Yeah, any superhuman, super intelligent would be friendly. I think, because you know it's a bit like saying we are a little bit more intelligent than the animal world, and therefore we don't deliberately are unkind, although we eat them. But we don't necessarily want to go and punish them and make life difficult for them. Yeah, well, where are we now?
Well, I heard that the Americans got warned off. You know, the Americans, they dropped I think it was Ronald Reagan, wasn't it? Who dropped the space adventures. Was it Reagan?
Dropped what, sorry?
Yeah, well, I heard that Ronald Reagan, the other one who dropped these journeys to the moon. You know, they dropped them all of a sudden, didn't they? You know, one minute.
Oh yeah, after Kennedy, the funding was after they landed the thing on the moon, they cut off the funding.
Yeah.
That's why they didn't put anything for the next 30, 40 years.
Well, I heard that they got warned off. You know,
by aliens, you mean?
Well, you know, because our planet produces such a load of problems for the universe. I mean, there's millions of these things flying around in space, isn't there? You know, all of these empty rockets are flying around and all sorts of things. You know, so we don't just pollute the Earth; we also pollute the universe. I don't know. It was only a theory, you know.
Yeah, well, we've got a chance of unpolluting our minds first. I think that's not an easy thing to do. Okay, shall we call it a day now and wait for the next one? Okay, thank you very much, all of you, for your participation and good questions and interest in things which are really important. Okay.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Okay, take care. Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.